Tonight, somewhere in the world, a soldier is dying of a disease no enemy gave him. That has always been true. For most of human history, it was truer than anyone wanted to admit. We remember wars by their battles: Gettysburg, Waterloo, the Somme. We build monuments to the men who charged the guns. But for most of history, the guns weren't what killed the most soldiers. Something smaller was. Consider the American Civil War. Roughly 620,000 soldiers died. Historians now estimate that 2 out of every 3 of those deaths came from disease, not combat. Not bullets, not bayonets, dysentery, typhoid, measles. Men who had survived cannon fire were dying in their tents from dirty water. Why does that keep happening? Why does an army with better weapons still lose to something it can't even see? The answer starts before any war begins. It starts with crowding. An army is not a natural way for humans to live. Thousands of young men, many from small towns and isolated farms, suddenly packed together in camps. They share water. They share latrines when there are any. They share the air in overcrowded tents. For a virus or bacterium, this is not a hardship of war. This is paradise. A soldier who grew up in a small village might have no immunity to diseases that were common in a big city 200 miles away. Put him next to a city-raised recruit, and within weeks, an outbreak has a new home. Military camps have historically been described by doctors as some of the most dangerous environments a human being can enter. Not because of the enemy, because of the crowd. The Napoleonic Wars offer one of the starkest examples in history. In 1812, Napoleon marched roughly 600,000 men into Russia. Fewer than 100,000 came back. Historians long blamed the brutal Russian winter. But researchers studying the remains of soldiers from that campaign found something else: traces of typhus and trench fever, carried by lice, found in the dental pulp of soldiers who died along the retreat. The cold didn't defeat Napoleon's army alone. Disease had already been quietly killing it for months. Here's a question worth sitting with. What if the greatest military disasters in history weren't failures of strategy at all? What if they were failures of sanitation? Go back further, to the world before germ theory existed. Before anyone understood that invisible organisms were the cause of illness. For most of human history, soldiers who got sick were seen as unlucky, cursed, or simply weak. No one connected a soldier's fever to the stagnant water he drank 3 days earlier. Doctors in ancient armies had no concept of bacteria. They didn't know that a wound, packed with dirty cloth, was an invitation for infection. They didn't know that human waste near a water source could kill more men than an entire opposing legion. The Peloponnesian War, fought in ancient Greece starting in 431 BC, saw the city of Athens gripped by a plague so devastating that it may have shaped the outcome of the entire war. Historians estimate the plague killed as much as a quarter of the Athenian population, soldiers and citizens together, packed inside city walls during a siege. The historian Thucydides, who lived through it, described a city where the healthy grew afraid to help the sick, because helping meant dying too. An enemy army didn't need to breach those walls. The walls had already become a trap. Why does packing people together for safety so often become the thing that kills them? Fast forward to World War I, and the pattern hasn't gone away. It's only gotten more mechanized. Trenches, mud, standing water for weeks at a time. Millions of men living in conditions that, on paper, sound less like a battlefield and more like a breeding ground. Trench fever alone infected an estimated 1 million soldiers during the war. It was spread by body lice, thriving in uniforms that couldn't be washed for weeks. And then, as the war was ending, something far larger arrived. The 1918 influenza pandemic. It's often called the Spanish flu, though it likely didn't originate in Spain at all. Some researchers point to a military base in Kansas as an early source. Soldiers, moving by the millions across oceans and continents, became the perfect delivery system. Crowded troop ships, crowded barracks, crowded field hospitals. The 1918 flu is estimated to have killed between 50 and 100 million people worldwide, more than the war itself. Some historians describe World War I's troop movements as one of the most effective disease-spreading operations ever created by accident. An army built to win a war on the battlefield ended up losing a different one it never even knew it was fighting. Here's the uncomfortable truth buried inside all of this. For most of human history, if you wanted to defeat an enemy army, you didn't necessarily need better soldiers. You needed them to get sick before you did. This wasn't always accidental either. Long before anyone understood microbiology, people understood contagion enough to weaponize it. During the siege of Kaffa in 1346, attacking forces reportedly catapulted the bodies of plague victims over the city walls. Whether or not this single act caused the outbreak that followed, it reflects something chilling. Humans figured out disease could be a weapon long before they understood what disease actually was. Centuries later, during the French and Indian War, British officers at Fort Pitt distributed blankets from a smallpox hospital to Native American representatives, an act now widely understood as an early instance of deliberate biological warfare. The soldiers with the sharpest swords didn't always win. Sometimes the side that understood contagion even a little held the real advantage. So what actually changed this? What finally started tipping the balance back toward the battlefield instead of the infirmary? Sanitation. In the mid-1800s, a British nurse named Florence Nightingale arrived at a military hospital during the Crimean War and was horrified by what she found. Overflowing sewage, contaminated water, wounded men dying not from their injuries, but from the filth surrounding them. She pushed for improved sanitation, ventilation, and hygiene standards. Death rates at the hospital dropped dramatically in the months that followed. Around the same time, the physician John Snow was tracing a cholera outbreak in London to a single contaminated water pump, laying groundwork for the germ theory of disease that would transform medicine. By World War II, armies understood something their ancestors never had. Clean water, sanitation, vaccination, and hygiene weren't just comfort measures. They were military strategy. For the first time in recorded history, combat deaths in major conflicts began to outnumber disease deaths. It had taken thousands of years of war for humanity to realize that its deadliest enemy was never fully human at all. So here's the reframe. We tell war stories through generals and battles, as if history is decided entirely by human will and human courage. But for most of human history, the deciding factor was invisible. It didn't carry a weapon. It didn't wear a uniform. It didn't care which side it was on. Every army that ever marched into unfamiliar territory wasn't just facing an enemy force. It was facing every microorganism that had been waiting there long before either side arrived. The next time you read about a great military victory, ask yourself a different question. Was it won on the battlefield? Or was it won weeks earlier, in a latrine, in a water source, in a crowded tent no one thought to clean?